Hello and welcome to Leica Review. Today I want to answer one of the most important questions I get asked about, which regards to the zoom lenses versus prime lenses. A lot of people think that the prime lenses are superior in terms of quality and optics than to zooms, and that images are exceptional if you are only using primes. But there has been a lot of rumors that the zooms have been catching up to primes. So those are the questions I want to answer because, as you may know, for the Leica M series, there are no real zooms. They are actually 16, 18, 21, but they're all different singular particular focal lengths, and you cannot go in between the 16 and 18 or 18 and 21. Similarly, there is another lens that Leica produces, the 28, 35, and 50, and of course those are fixed prime lenses all incorporated into one lens. Technically speaking, the ones that are produced by Leica as zoom lenses are the 24mm to 90mm and 90mm to 280mm. That is for the Leica SL series. Now, as you may remember, when they came out with the Leica SL, it was their only zoom, and then later on they added the 90 to 280mm. And a lot of people said the quality was exceptional for the 24 to 90mm, which covered the broad range of focal lengths. So I wanted to discuss if you are going to purchase a zoom lens to cover all these focal distances, or if you could invest on getting just primes. As you may know, primes are considerably expensive, and if you are going to get 3 or 4 lenses to cover a focal range, then you're going to spend a lot more than getting a zoom. Now, out of those questions, I want to answer this in two parts. One is from a filming perspective. The second is from a cinematic perspective. As you may know, Leica SL has been used to film and has a 4K quality, yet the Leica M series has abandoned the video capabilities altogether. But I think it is important to cover all these points so that we know what we can do with each lens we have. As you may know, if you are a wedding photographer or if you're a professional photographer from other camera users, like for example, if you've been using Nikons or Canons, you may be using a 24 to 70 or 70 to 200mm, like the one here, this Canon one. This is what the bread and butter of wedding photographers or events photographers use. Similarly, Nikon also makes a similar lens, which is right here, the 70 to 200mm, and these lenses are very popular. These are the lenses that are most often used by professionals. Yet we have the 24 to 90mm. It's a broad focal range, and that is designed to serve for professionals in a very similar manner these lenses have served for decades for professional photographers. Now, Leica SL being one of the lenses that has come out in the market and is trying to establish itself as one of the key players in terms of the market, it is a lens to be reckoned with because the optics are there, the quality is there. The price, however, is 3 to 4 times more expensive than getting one of these zoom lenses. But the question still remains, is it worth getting a zoom lens compared to a prime lens? Now, first of all, it has to be understood that in a focal distance and a focal range, we are talking about different focal lengths. So if you're doing, for example, 24mm and you're doing a 35mm and then you're doing a 50mm, they are going to be very different because the different elements within the optical range is going to get into effect. For example, certain elements are going to move back and forth, creating a different look. So what happens with most zoom lenses is at the very end of the focal range and the beginning of the focal range, they are not usually as efficient as if you are going to use it in comparison to a prime lens. For example, if you're using a 24 to 90mm lens from Leica SL, you're going to have this issue. The 24mm compared to a prime lens is gonna not perform as well. Secondly, you might know is that the aperture is not gonna be as fast. So, for example, you can use a 50 millimeter at 1.4, but you're not going to have that 1.4 for a zoom lens like the SL24 to 90 millimeters. On the end of the spectrum, when we go to the 90 millimeters, you can have a f2, for example, from Leica M, which can be adapted onto a Leica SL. Again, at that focal range, it is not as efficient as using a fast lens like the prime lenses. So the two distinct disadvantages of using zoom is having a less opportunity to gather as much light because of the less opening of the aperture. And secondly, like the one on the 24 to 90, it goes from 2.8 to f4. So what's happening is you're not having a steady f2.8 or f4, that it is going to be a variable aperture, and variable apertures often cause problems, especially if you're into filming. And it is for that very reason it is very advisable to use a steady focal range. And also it's important, if you're going to use prime lenses, that they match the zoom lens if you're again into filming. What is one advantage is when you have a zoom lens, you don't have to carry like 3 or 4 lenses with you and having to change that. If you're a professional photographer, again, if you're covering live events, shows, or weddings, then you don't have a lot of time to change lenses. And that is for that very reason they use these zoom lenses. As far as I'm concerned, using a zoom lens is no different than using a prime lens if you are going to use the middle of that range. So if you're going to use between 35, 50, or let's say 75 millimeters on a zoom lens, it's going to give you incredible quality. Of course, as I said again, the aperture is not going to open as wide. So if your lighting conditions permit you to use those lenses, it's going to give you that advantage. Now, on the other end of that spectrum, you're using prime lenses, as I mentioned, it gives you that wider aperture. Wider aperture gives you greater bokeh. So using bokeh as part of your composition is, if it's that important to you, then it is something to consider, because you're not going to get f1.4 at 50 millimeters. Again, that is something that you might want to consider when you're going to purchase your prime lens versus your zoom lens. And third most important factor is having that zoom lens is going to be very heavy compared to having a prime lens. Prime lenses are smaller, more compact, and they obviously have less elements compared to a zoom lens. So that means you are lugging around less weight. And if you're, for example, going on a trip and you're going to, for example, photograph Paris or Rome or Barcelona, you might not want to carry that big lens, and it does attract a lot of attention. So for that very reason, I don't like going to any space with zoom lenses. You look like a paparazzi most of the time, or you look like somebody who's so keen on photographing that you don't care about carrying that weight around. Personally, if a lens is not able to suit your purposes in general, then you are going to have difficulties, because most of the time what we do is when we are going to photograph a landscape or urban space, we usually use a wider angle lens. But if you're going to do portraiture, or if you want to zoom in onto a certain aspect and create that composition, you're going to use probably a telephoto lens. So those two lenses have very specific uses, and it is for that very reason it doesn't need to be in your bag all the time. Now, zoom lenses, because they carry all that, it gives you that advantage. Again, speaking of aperture and opening, zoom lenses, they're not going to give you that light gathering capabilities of the prime lenses. And this is for that reason, when you're doing nighttime photography, you're going to have less light, and less light causes difficulties when you're doing compositions, because you're going to push the ISO up, and pushing the ISO up creates difficulties in terms of gathering that grain, and that grain is often not the ones that we want to have, because we're not using film, you're using digital, and digital noise, as it comes at, for example, 3200 or higher ISOs, creates images that are not so pleasing. So for that very reason, I like to keep the ISO as low as possible, open my aperture as much as possible if I'm going to do shots in the dark. Of course, if you have lighting and lighting works for you, that is wonderful. And that's one of the things that I like to use when I'm composing, because light creates the ability to shape your composition in the way you want. Now, Having spoken about the photography aspect, it is also important to focus on one other aspect, which is focus breathing, because focus breathing is an issue with some of the zoom lenses. What that means is when you're trying to focus, the perspective changes, and that is something that we don't desire often, especially when it comes to filming. And it is for that very reason a lot of filmmakers, they use prime lenses to avoid that focus breathing, because prime lenses often have less focus breathing than zoom lenses. Similarly, a lens that is parfocal means that it can, when you're changing your focus distance or you're zooming in and out, it doesn't lose focus. Most of the lenses, whether using Canon, Nikon, or other brands, they lose focus if they are not parfocal. And most lenses for photography are not parfocal because they are never needed that way. But however, when it comes to filming, you're gonna need to have parfocal lenses. Parfocal means that beginning of the lens or at the end of the lens, the focus does not change. And I give you a good example. This is a Sigma lens, 1835 at f2, at T2, which is f1.8. This is a very, very fast lens. It is a very good lens. It's parfocal, so that means if you are going to do filming and you're zooming in and out, you're not going to lose focus. Of course, compare this to, for example, I'll give you this is one of the heaviest lenses. This is the Noctilux 50 millimeters. Look at the size difference. You're gonna see that there's a big difference in size, and of course, this is something that is to be considered because zoom lenses are heavy, and cinema lenses are even heavier because of all the apparatus that's on it and the difficulties of constructing these lenses, because they have a longer focus throw to be able to get nailed better focus. And that is something that most people forget, that having lenses that are cinematic is very, very important if you are going to do professional filming. A lot of people, they don't mind using prime lenses and changing them because they know that they're going to be able to attain that look. But they will be cut short because they won't be able to zoom. They lose time because they have to change lenses to meet that purpose of filming in different focal lengths. And that is something that a lot of people forget, that the time, any time that a camera is running and all these people are involved in a set, that is when you have a lot of money that is being spent, because you're consuming the time of all those individuals, plus all the directors, the cinematographers, all the producers, everybody on stage, especially the actors. So it is for that reason using a zoom lens is incredibly important. And it's for that very reason, if you're going to do filming, that is another aspect to consider. So if I'm using the Leica SL, I would use a 24 to 90 millimeter rather than the single focal length, because that will give me the ability to adjust my focal distance without having to take the lens off the body and put a new one on. And of course, it will lighten the weight. So these are the two important aspects to consider when you are using zoom lenses and prime lenses. Again, coming back to zoom lenses, they are not any worse in quality, or they're not lesser in quality than prime lenses. Of course, generally we prefer prime lenses because they are specifically designed for that focal. So if you're a photographer, you would probably want to use appropriate lens for the project that you have at hand. So if you're doing photography of portraits, then you're going to probably go for like 50 or 75 or 90, even 135 millimeter to capture that beautiful portrait, and that's going to give you a blurred background. Again, if you're going to do wide angle lenses, landscapes, urban photography, architectural photography, these obviously probably you would want to use wide angle lenses. That's another aspect to consider. So that gives you that flexibility, and that gives you the lighter weight. I personally would not say that zoom lenses are any worse in quality, because they have come a long way and the constructions have changed a lot. So now the competition is a lot fierce. Before, there were only 2 or 3 players in the market, and they had only very, very limited amount of supply of good quality optics. Now the quality of optics have gone skyrocketing in terms of the precision, in terms of the quality, the coatings. So I'm expecting a lot of the other players to come up and bring this kind of quality. Again, getting back to this lens, at T2, which is f1.8, you're talking about 18 millimeters. Leica at 18 millimeters is 3.4, 3.8. These are not as fast as these. And also, you look at getting a Summicron, for example, it's only at f2. This is still faster. And that is one of the reasons I consider getting fast lenses as one of the key factors in being able to increase your capabilities as a photographer and your abilities to do photography in a creative sense. So I hope all this, what I've talked about, makes a lot of sense to you and it helps you to improve your photography. I seriously recommend that you look into using both these types of lenses, the primes and the zooms, and come to your own conclusions. Now, some of you might say, I have Leica M, I only have prime lenses. You can buy an adapter Leica R and put a 24 to 90 millimeter lens on it from the Leica R series and use it. I personally have used it in all formats, so I would suggest there is no right or wrong camera to use it on. If you want to try the zoom lenses, prime lenses will always be there. So please, especially if you are a photographer, own some prime lenses, the 50 millimeter being one of the key ones, and then develop your skill set from there. And I appreciate you watching this video, and I hope you like our video and subscribe to our channel. I've also put some links down at the bottom to see if you can visit these sites. Also, our website is there, so you can see what we have written in terms of articles. And I appreciate you watching this video. Thank you.